Welcome back to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, and tonight we have a great show. One of my most favorite topics of all time is definitely the Bermuda Triangle, and that's what we have in store for you tonight. However, in this case, we are covering such a broad territory of cross-applied topics in conjunction with the Bermuda Triangle. If that sounds a little funky, because it can seem a little funky, but with this book, it's not as funky, and it might actually sound quite real and possible. And to all the listeners who are just tuning in to Paranormal Now for the first time, I welcome you. This is a podcast, though we schedule our show weekly, and it airs as part of the live stream every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us. We have a cavalcade of exciting topics, and we surf our cosmic highway of paranormal landmines every week, and we have a really good time. And we have some really great guests on tonight. They are the authors of Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, True Encounters with Electronic Fog, Missing Aircraft, and Time Warps. Bruce Gernon is a certified seaplane flight instructor and a master captain with a Coast Guard license, a real estate broker, commercial building contractor, and owner of Keys Properties. Bruce has appeared in 36 cable channel documentaries about the Bermuda Triangle, in which he describes his space-time warp experience, often as the featured interview. He also coined the term electronic fog. Bruce resides in Boynton Beach, Florida, with his wife, Lynn. Co-author Rob MacGregor co-authored also The Fog with Bruce Gernon and has published 20 novels and 24 nonfiction books. An author of 7 Indiana Jones novels, he has been on the New York Times bestseller list and is a winner of the Edgar Allan Poe Award for mystery writing for his novel Prophecy Rock. His most recent nonfiction title is Sensing the Future, A Field Guide to Precognition, co-authored with his wife, Trish MacGregor. The MacGregors reside in Wellington, Florida. Bruce and Rob, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks, Alan. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are. There's so many wide ranges of topics within this one book. I'm not exactly sure where to start. So actually, I'll let Bruce, because so much of this is part of your story. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey, including your personal journey, your actual journey, but then the preceding journey of how you came to write this book?
Well, it all started on December 4th of 1970, where I had this phenomenal experience flying an airplane from Andros Island in the Bahamas back to Palm Beach International Airport. And I had made this flight a dozen times before, a two-way journey from Andros and back to Palm Beach. But on this particular day, an incredible thing happened. And I've been researching it ever since then now for 47 years. I've been researching the Bermuda Triangle longer than any living person.
Mm-hmm.
So okay. I've collected a lot of information about it. And then I teamed up with Rob, who's one of the greatest writers in the world, and we've come up with our second book now on this subject.
Our first book was called The Fog.
The Fog, right. And how did you guys initially make contact?
That was kind of interesting. There was an article in the Palm Beach Post about me. I think it was related to my Indiana Jones novels that I'd written. I had written 7 Indiana Jones novels, including The Last Crusade. Bruce saw that and decided to contact me, and because he was interested in writing this book about the Bermuda Triangle. Well, it turns out that he only lived about 1.5 miles away from me, and and we belonged to the same gym. So we just started seeing each other at the gym, talking about it. And I was a little hesitant at first because I had other things on the plate at the time. But he was persistent, kept after me. And finally, I said, okay, let's take a look at this material and start working with it and working with Bruce. And at first I was somewhat skeptical about the Bermuda Triangle, but the more I talked to Bruce, the more I saw all these other stories. I realized that there's something there, and that it's a real mystery. In spite of all the skeptics who try to debunk it, there's really something there. And as Bruce always says, if those skeptics were in that airplane with me as we flew through that tunnel and moved ahead 90 or 100 miles instantly from near Bimini to Miami Beach, they wouldn't be so skeptical.
Yeah, but Rob still didn't want to write the book for a long time. I bugged him for a couple of years, it seemed like, and he kept thinking, well, maybe. And then finally, it was actually took me 30 years where I finally, after thinking about this every day for 30 years, I came up with this concept that electronic fog is that term that I created, but it's a strange fog, but I could never figure out how I got from the Bahamas to Miami so fast, and I didn't get to see any of the Bahamas while I was flying over it. And then I realized that the reason I couldn't see it is because the fog was attached to me. And instead of flying through fog like all pilots think, and they still think this today, probably 90% of the pilots, especially commercial pilots, they don't realize that this fog can attach to them. So what
this electronic fog.
Yeah, when it attaches, you can't understand it. What's going on here? Because their mind is thinking that they're flying through this fog. And so after 30 years, I came up with this idea that it was attached, and I told Rob, and Rob says, "Now we have a book," he says. That's right.
And the thing is, with the electronic fog, the way Bruce discovered this is he was flying. It was actually a second flight he took when he was in this fog, and the Weather Bureau was saying there was clear skies, but he was flying through this fog, and he was looking down, and there was a hole in the fog that continued as he flew. That he couldn't get past that hole. It was going with him. Then he realized it's not the hole, not only the hole that's going with him, that it's the fog. And probably the reason that the weather appeared clear to the meteorologists was that the fog only maybe extended about a quarter of a mile around the plane.
That's right. Yeah, the meteorologists actually verified there was no fog in the area of South Florida that was flying over the Everglades, and then I couldn't understand that. It couldn't be possible because mentally I thought I could see fog everywhere over South Florida. So I didn't realize it was attached to me at the time, but then, like Rob said, that's what really gave me the key to realizing, well, wow, it was flying with me instead of me flying through it.
And I'm sorry, how were you able to confirm that the electric fog was, what did you say, 1.5 miles?
I think it's about Bruce usually says about a quarter of a mile around.
A quarter of a mile.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's an estimate. It forms apparently like a spear all around the airplane. There's a chemical doctor from Ukraine that has done a great deal of research on this, and he calls it a ball lightning cloud instead of a small ball lightning. It's much larger.
So well, you've done your research, and I'm wondering, so what other, something like ball lightning or something along these lines, what other scientific observations or studies have you found that can lead you to create a theory of an actual scientific theory to support your idea of this electric fog?
Well, there's one of the chapters is by Professor David Paris, who has credentials as being a top meteorologist, one of the best meteorologists that I know, and he's also a physicist.
And teaches astronomy as well at the at the University of Nebraska. He took a great interest in Bruce's story when he read The Fog, because he's very interested in the concept of creating a warp drive. In fact, that's what he's attempting to do, and this is the fantasy drive of science fiction, Star Trek. And he's working on this this theory that it doesn't take a great, enormous amount of energy to create a warp drive. And when he read about Bruce's experience, he realized that Bruce had, when he went through this tunnel near Bimini with thunderstorms on either side of him, that he had actually entered a natural warp bubble. And Bruce sees it as electronic fog surrounding him. And what a warp bubble does is Bruce moved apparently 90 miles virtually instantly, and his plane, of course, would disintegrate at 280,000 miles an hour or whatever the enormous speed would be. But Bruce's plane was moving at 180 miles an hour and continued moving at 180 miles an hour. What happened with a warp bubble is space compresses in front and expands behind. So it's just like a shift, like a teleportation. He doesn't like the term teleportation. He thinks that sounds too paranormal. What is the term he uses, Bruce, again?
A linear displacement. Yeah.
Linear displacement, right? That's the more scientific term for that type of motion. And literally, Bruce could have ended up out in space, but he got out of it 10 miles off of shore from Miami Beach when he's still when this fog is breaking up around him, and then he flies for 3 minutes and he realizes he's not near Bimini, he's over Miami Beach, which seemed impossible to him and his father and the business partner. The three of them were on the plane. Bruce, you should describe the actual flight a little bit about the clouds, because that's really interesting.
Okay, yeah, well, it's happened when I departed from Andros Island in the afternoon at 3 p.m. And it had been raining all morning. We wanted to leave that morning, but there was heavy rains, and then it let up in the afternoon, and so we took off. But the island was overcast, and so we stayed at 1,000 feet for like 10 minutes. And we have Professor Parrish found a weather map of that day that we took off, and it showed that the whole island of Andros, which is the largest island in the Bahamas, was covered with large accumulation of thunderstorms and overcasts. And so when we reached the western shoreline of Andros, approaching the Great Bahama Bank, it cleared up. So apparently the bad weather was only over Andros. And so then I started to climb up to our pre-approved altitude of 10,500 feet. And I noticed that a few miles offshore was this strange lenticular cloud. And at the time, I really didn't realize it was that strange because it looked like a normal cloud. And the reason I didn't know it was strange is because it was only 500 feet above the surface of the water, and it was about 1,000 feet thick and maybe a mile long, half mile wide, kind of elliptical shaped, and not a normal cloud to be at that level. I've seen clouds similar to this up around 20,000 feet in South Florida, and that's a rare occurrence to see them too, but you never see them this low. They normally...
Lenticular clouds are often at the top of mountains, hovering above mountains. They look like huge UFOs floating above mountaintops.
Yeah, that's what this looked like, but there's no mountains around here. That's why it's so rare to see the lenticular cloud. But anyway, I had to climb up at the time, so I needed to contact the Miami radio and file my flight plan because there were no telephones on Andros back in 1970. And I started climbing up over this cloud. It was right in our flight path, and filed the flight plan with Miami. And they said the weather between Andros and Miami was perfectly clear, but there was a couple of large thunderstorms scattered around South Florida, but he said they'd probably I'd be able to circumnavigate them to get back to Palm Beach. So that sounded good. And so then after I got about 4,000 feet up, I looked around me, and I'm really surprised to see what's going on here. That small lenticular cloud had spread out all around me. And then it caught up to me, and I went inside it. And
so were you approaching the cloud? How? Because you're saying it's expanding, right? So, and what you're moving towards it?
You're past it, right? You're past it.
Yeah,
right?
I'm going past. I thought I was way past.
Okay.
I'm climbing up at 105 miles an hour,
Mm-hmm.
and now the cloud's directly below me. So I'm thinking, well, maybe this is the birth stage of a cumulonimbus thunderstorm. But at the time, I didn't realize that this is what I call a time storm. It's like the mother storm that forms and can create this electronic fog, and it happens very rapidly. And what happens is this lenticular cloud will spread out and form like a donut shape, looking at it from a satellite, a torus-shaped storm. And I had a hard time getting away from it as far as altitude went, and I kept going in and out of it several times. I went in it, and then I'd pop out of it, and so it had strong updraft, so I'd burst out of it thinking I'm free, but then it would catch right back up to me.
Yeah, so you're flying at like 105 miles an hour at that point, rising, right?
Yeah, right.
And the plane was, and the cloud was catching up to you, moving.
Exactly. And I didn't have time to think about that at the time either. It's like, and so finally we get up to 11,500 feet, and we finally break free of the storm. And so I look around, and it's all clear sky in front of me. But I look on either side of me, and all I could see was this semicircular shaped squall. That this storm was more than just a cumulonimbus thunderstorm. Apparently it was a huge squall, from what I thought, that had spread out on either side of me as far as I could see, which would be 10 miles on one side, 10 miles on the other. And I noticed it was curved, kind of strange, just almost like a perfect circle. But anyway, I leveled off at 11,500 and started cruising almost 200 miles an hour, and forgot about what I had just experienced and started just concentrating on flying the airplane. And then after just a couple of minutes, I'm looking in front of me, and now I see this huge squall-shaped storm in front of me with the opposite curve than the one that I had just left. And I'm thinking, well, I can't fly over it, because now it was way over 20, well, actually it was over 40,000 feet. Now, when I escaped it, it looked like it was around 20,000, but now it was up to 40,000, so I couldn't climb over it. And so I'm thinking, well, I'll fly under it. And then I noticed I can't fly under it because it's laying right on the surface of the ocean. And so I'm on it.
So he's like inside a huge donut, about what, 25
miles
across?
Yeah,
that is,
inside diameter, yeah. About 25
I mean, that
miles.
you must have a really eerie feeling at that point, no?
Yeah, it was starting to get a little strange, but when you're a pilot, you need to concentrate on flying the airplane. That's the main number one thing to be thinking about. So, and I'm flying by instruments direct to Bimini.
Mm-hmm.
And so my flight path took me right into the storm at 11,500 feet. And so when I entered it, visibility was better than I thought, because I could still see the ocean. But then these lightning flashes started going off, and the deeper I went, the more intense it got. So it got so intense, it's like, no, this is too dangerous. So I made a sharp turn to the left and started heading due south, exited the cloud, immediately called the Miami radio and told them I had deviated from the flight path and was heading south, and I wanted to see if I could fly around this storm and find a way to get around it. And they said, fine, no problem, fly around it, let us know after you get around it. Okay. So then 3 minutes later, while I'm trying to get around it, I'm flying along the edge of it, and then I look forward and I notice that the storm is curving around and connecting to the storm that I had just exited. So I realize now I'm trapped inside this huge donut-shaped storm.
So when you say, just to get a better visual, when you say donut-shaped, on the cover of the book, it's like you're flying through the hole, or
he's just getting to that.
Okay,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the most phenomenal part of the whole thing.
So, but it's like you're perpendicular to a donut standing up on its edge, rather than a donut lying down.
No, that's
looking at it.
Yeah, that's the tunnel he found to get out to escape.
Yeah.
He's
Okay.
inside a huge donut cloud that the inside diameter is about 25 miles, but it's completely circular. It's the two U-shaped clouds coming together, and he sees where they're joining together on one side, right, Bruce? And that's where you decided you could get out?
Right, yeah. Looking at a satellite view, it would look like a donut.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so looking
like
down, it looks like a
miles in
donut.
diameter with a clear opening of, say, 20 miles.
Gotcha, okay.
And so what apparently happened was the storm formed just offshore of Andros and then spread out left and right, and I estimate around 300 miles an hour, and then connected on the opposite side. And that's where I saw the opposite side of this storm connect. It connected on the bottom first, and it formed like a huge U-shaped valley in between the two storms. So I figured, well, this is a dangerous situation, and this is probably my only way out. And so I headed for it. And then what happened while I'm heading for it, the tops of the cloud formed Anvil Heads. And in our book, there's an actual photo I took of some similar shaped storms with Anvil Heads forming and then connecting to each other and forming a horizontal tunnel. And the tunnel is around 10,000 feet to the center of it. And I've seen many of these tunnels form and photographed them. And so this is the best photo I took in the late 70s that's in the new book.
Yeah, if you got the book there, Ellen, on page 120, you can see the Anvil Heads at top, and then on the bottom photo, they're connecting at the top, and that's what Bruce saw.
Okay.
And that's where he tried to fly through, and that's what you see on the cover of the book.
Were you calling them something else? Because in the book it says two thunderheads coming together. Was there another name for that?
Anvil Heads is what the terminology is in the aviation world. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So the two Anvil Heads met and then formed a horizontal tunnel, which in this case was at least 10 miles long. And the photo that Rob mentioned shows a storm that's smaller, and it's over the Everglades, and the tunnel that's just forming is about 5 miles long. But if you look to the right of the tunnel that's about to form, that's real wide, you notice that there's another tunnel that is maybe only 400 or 500 feet in diameter.
So
and that tunnel is 5 miles long. See, there was actual series of tunnels that formed in between these thunderstorm cells. And see, no one living has flown through these.
Tell them what happened. Tell them what happened when you flew through that tunnel.
Yeah, we'd all like to know what happened.
Get to it, Bruce. This is the good part.
Yeah, well, that's what's on the cover of the book.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But before we actually get to that, so I just want to recap. So you started at 40,000, and now are you still at 11,500 feet at this point?
No, I dove down because I
even further. Okay.
The center of the tunnel was at 10,000.
10,000. Okay.
I dove down and I went to full power because I noticed it was rapidly closing. I mean, at first when the tunnel formed, it was probably a mile in diameter.
Sure.
But then it started rapidly closing, and I wasn't sure, how long it would take. And by studying them in the past, I've seen that they usually last around 3 minutes or so before they collapse. And so it would have been a really close call for me to make it through there. I hoped I could make it. So I dove down and we entered right into the center of the tunnel. And by then it was maybe 700 or 800 feet in diameter when I entered.
Okay.
And that's when something incredible happened. Upon entrance of the tunnel, when I looked at it from the outside, it was shiny, clear, smooth walls on the tunnel. There wasn't hardly any wind that day. Winds were variable. And so there was no turbulence, and it was like silver shining because the sun was down. It was like 3:30 in the afternoon. The sun was setting down and making the tunnel glow bright white. But then, as soon as the aircraft entered into the tunnel, something incredible happened. And I believe that is when I was getting to see the fabric of time.
The fabric of
Space
time.
and time. Yeah.
Okay.
I was seeing it form right in front of me as I
All your-
instantly entered it.
All
So
your
that-
equipment your electronic equipment went out about that time, right?
It probably did, but I had to concentrate 10 miles in front of me on the exit hole, because I realized if I veered off only a few feet to the left or the right, I would scrape the tunnel walls.
Mhm.
So I couldn't even look at my instruments. I had to put 100% concentration.
So you literally
on the
had
hole.
you had tunnel vision.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And also he had zero gravity, right, Bruce?
Well, that's when I reached the other end. So like on the cover, it shows the airplane maybe only a half a mile from the exit, and now the tunnel had shrunk down to like 40 feet in
Wow. Okay.
the artist rendering.
Well, let me ask you though, when you say that you saw time, it sounds strange, right? It's like saying you saw gravity, because it's supposed to be this sort of
Right.
invisible force.
Right.
So, what gave you the sense that you were actually seeing time?
Well, from all my research, and like there's some scientific analysis of what it would be like if you could travel through time, and the vision of what you're seeing changes entirely as you travel through time. Einstein was the first to come up with that concept, and then there's Max Planck Institute has a new place right here in West Palm Beach, and they had a display where you could ride a bicycle through time, and I tried that out, and it reminded me of when I went through the tunnel. As you start pedaling the bike through a city, all the buildings change their appearance, and they start kind of swirling around you as you do it.
And that's what he was seeing.
And
The clouds were swirling around.
Yeah.
The inside of the
Right.
tunnel was swirling around counterclockwise, wasn't it, Bruce?
Right. And
So in a way-
that means you're going forward counterclockwise.
Right. So I was going to say, like, the actual physical clouds themselves aren't moving. It's time that's moving and creating that illusion to your eyes. Is that correct to say?
Right. Pretty
Okay,
much,
yeah.
yes. So
It's-
it
yeah,
should have
it's
taken
amazing.
me 3 minutes to go through that tunnel, which was at
Yeah.
least 10 miles long. But I was only in there for 20 seconds.
Yeah, it really is amazing, and we're so lucky now that you have references, scientifically based references. It makes me think of what was the movie with Matthew McConaughey? Interstellar.
Interstellar,
And
right? Yeah.
right, and the giant black hole at the center of this solar system was actually in theory based on pure math, and that's exactly what this thing is supposed to look on based on the actual math. It's a great thing that we have these references now. But we're going to come back after this quick break, and we're talking about Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, a book of true encounters with electronic fog, missing aircraft, and time warps, with Bruce Gernon and Rob MacGregor. This is very exciting, and I hope you guys stay tuned for the next segment of our show. So hang in there. We will be right back. This is Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, on the Inception Radio Network. And if you are listening to us for the first time, just some helpful information for you. You can always listen to the Inception Radio Network live stream 24/7 by going to Live 365, Stitcher Radio, Nobex Radio. You can also listen in on TuneIns. You can download the podcast there. You can listen on Streama, Shoutcast, Winamp, Win Media Player, and QuickTime. And, of course, we're also on the Roku Media Player as well. And for all of you out there who are big fans, you listen to the show a lot, but you need to take it on the go, all you have to do is download the IRN app, which you can get on either an Android or an iPhone, smartphone. Download the app. You can chat with other listeners of the show. You can do other interactive activities on it and listen at different megahertz, because you may have a weaker connection or a stronger connection. It depends on what device you're using and how you're traveling. So it's a really great app. It's very adaptive, and yeah, check it out. So bringing us back to this fantastic story, very exciting right now. Bruce Gernon was telling us about his experience of getting caught in this circular, almost donut-like electric cloud, and he's entered this tunnel. And as he entered this tunnel, to him, it reminds him of, I guess he thinks he can see space at that, or space and time warping at that point. If I'd be remiss if I forgot to say, taking us out of the break was Weapon of Choice, by the way, because that's one of my favorite Fatboy Slim songs. And I just imagined that if I was going through this cloud, that would be one of my songs I'd like to play if I had speakers on the airplane. Okay, so Bruce, if you can just pick it up and, continue on with your story.
Okay, well, right at that point when we ended, I was ready to exit the tunnel. I made it to the other end, and the wingtip scraped the edges of it. So now it was down to maybe a diameter of only 30 feet, because the wings are 36 feet apart. And when I looked back, there were like contrails forming on the wings, and then I watched the tunnel, and it collapsed right behind me and turned into like a slit that was rotating now clockwise from my view, since I made it through. And at the same time, this clear blue sky that was aiming toward Miami disappeared instantly. And it was this strange grayish yellow fuzzy type of atmosphere. And at the same time, I felt this strange feeling that I've only felt once in my life, and it is a feeling of zero gravity, which I've felt many, many times. But what made it different was I also felt like I was hydroplaning.
Like sliding through space, right?
Yeah, in a forward direction.
So hydroplaning, like it would feel with a car?
Yeah, or an airplane can hydroplane too, on water when it's taken off.
Sure.
Sliding on ice.
Or ice, yeah.
Yeah. And
it's like instead of slowing down when you're landing, it speeds up. Or all of a sudden, it's you get this feeling of speeding up, but then floating at the same time in zero gravity.
And your compasses were spinning, right, Bruce?
That's when I noticed, all the electronic instruments were malfunctioning. All the navigational ones were anyway. And the compass was slowly rotating counterclockwise. So I asked my dad. He was the expert navigator, and I was chief pilot, and I told him to give me a position fix. And normally it'd only take him like 10-15 seconds to do that using the navigational instruments, but he couldn't get a fix. He said, something's wrong here. And then I took a better look, and I could see like they weren't working. So I kind of remembered that I was on a heading of 290 degrees heading direct for Miami, so I just mentally kind of kept that heading in my mind, because I couldn't trust any of my instruments. But my altimeter seemed to be working. I was at 10,000 feet, so I slowed down to 180 miles an hour. And at this point, I was able to contact Miami radio. That's like the second thing you do when you're a good pilot. Is first you fly the airplane, second you navigate first, communicate second. So I was able to contact Miami radio. And I told them I was probably about 90 miles east, 85 miles east of Miami, 10,000 feet. How's the weather? What's going on? I seem to be in like some kind of fog here. And I think he could tell from my voice that there was something wrong. And then he couldn't find me on radar. And so then he switched me over to the radar center of Miami, and they couldn't find me on radar. And so then at that point, my passengers started acting up. My passenger business partner in the back seat was trying to help me. At first, he was a little bit of help. He thought maybe he saw some land, but I looked at it and it didn't appear to be land. And then he started like mumbling. He became like nauseous or something, and he's mumbling away nonstop, So I said to myself, okay, I got to block him out, because you don't want any distractions when you're in a stressful situation.
Sure.
So I totally blocked him out. So then when I was talking to the guy on the radio, my dad grabs the mic from me and starts screaming at him, telling him, what the hell do you mean you can't identify us on the radio? We got a brand new transponder on this airplane here. And the guy said, no, I can't find any airplanes anywhere between Andros and Miami right now. And so I had to rip the mic back from my dad, because he was getting in a state of panic. Yeah. So now I've got a passenger that's nauseous and a co-pilot that's in a state of panic. And so I told everybody to calm down. We're still flying. Let's see what happens. And everything was all fuzzy. And that's where the term electronic fog comes into effect. When you're captured by this fog, it's very difficult to explain. The famous writer Martin Caden, we write about him in our book. He probably has the most documented case of all experiences in the electronic fog, and he tried to explain it several times in his books, and he wrote like 200 books, and he tried to say, when he said, he made this comment, and it finally hit me, and that's what kind of keyed me off to realizing that it was attached to. He said he felt like he was flying inside a milk bottle. But see, he thought he was flying through this fog.
Okay.
But when he said he had a feeling that he was inside a milk bottle, that's when I realized, oh, the milk bottle's attached to the airplane. It's all around the airplane. It's like a spear of this electronic fog attached to the airplane. And so that's why I thought I was 90 miles east of Miami, and I never did get to see the chain of Bimini Islands. I should have flown over them in the Great Bahama Bank and then into the deep water of the Gulf Stream. I never got to see that.
Well, it makes you wonder, because you have all these descriptions, sensory experiences. What did you feel physically? Could you feel like you could feel time or a warping or anything at all?
Well, only when I was inside the tunnel. That's when I could visually and physically feel something going on. Okay. Yeah. So then 3 minutes later, I was in this fog for only 3 minutes. And then the radar controller comes back on the radio, and he's all excited. He says he's got an airplane directly over Miami Beach. And so I look at my watch, and I say, well, no, that's impossible. I said, I'm still looking for the Bimini Islands. I'm probably 80 miles or so east of you guys. And he says, are you sure? And then another phenomenal thing happened. I call it an electronic dissipation of this fog. These lines formed parallel to the direction of flight of the airplane. And they surrounded the whole airplane. And each line, to me, appeared to be several miles long. But that was an illusion, because I thought I was flying through this fog. I didn't realize it was attached to me. So these lines that I saw were probably maybe only 100 or 300 yards. And the lines cracked open, and I could see blue through the cracks. And it took about 10 seconds for these cracks to open up, and that's how the electronic dissipation, where I got to see clear sky. And back then I had 2010 vision, so I could see things that most people couldn't even see. And then I realized, yeah, the guy's right. I'm directly over Miami Beach. And I told him, okay, you're right. I'm over Miami Beach, impossible as it seems. And it was right at that point that I realized I had just experienced something, a weather phenomenon that was incredible. So that's when I started my research right there and memorizing it forever. So it's like I have a clear mind picture of what I saw. Mm-hmm. And so then we go back to Palm Beach, and I had to fly way out west over the Everglades to get around a huge storm that was over Fort Lauderdale, and it was offshore. I had to go out of my way, and there were like two storms, one over Lauderdale and one over the middle of the Everglades, and it was another kind of unusual thing. I had to fly down to 500 feet to get underneath this kind of like a bridge that formed in between the two storms, and then I dove underneath that and got clear of the two storms, and then headed back east to Palm Beach. So the whole flight took, instead of the normal 215 miles, it's more like 250 miles. And then when we landed, we actually touched down around 3:47 in the afternoon, and I taxied up to customs and looked at our watches. Oh, it's 3:48. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. That flight only took like 45 minutes, and we've done it a dozen times before, and it always takes an hour and a half. It's like, how did we do that so fast? So it didn't make sense to me.
And then you found out when you filled the tank up that you had extra gas. Gas was still in the jet fuel was in the.
Right. Yeah, we saved
10
gallons. We used 10 gallons less gas than normal, which would
there-
account for the 30 minutes.
Yeah. And got
that
there
we
early.
gained. Yeah.
If we can only all travel like that,
Yeah, right.
we could solve our energy
So
crisis.
I always thought it, I traveled that 100 miles in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, actually. I was 100, when I entered the tunnel, I was 100 miles. According to my instruments, I was 100 miles east of Miami.
Yeah.
So
David Perry's, the physicist, has a little different explanation. He thinks Bruce instantly moved 90 miles, and the 3 minute was when he came out of the warp bubble 10 miles out, and then he 3 minutes to get to Miami Beach. That's how he explains. So he has a little different explanation of the same experience. It's really interesting. You got to recognize, though, that this was 1971, and Bruce had never heard of the Bermuda Triangle. There was the book, The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz, was still like 3 years away from coming out. So he didn't know what happened to him. He had no reference.
Well,
I knew there was something strange out there from my two mentor pilots that in the 60s had an experience in the same area near Andros, where we tell the story in the book. They experienced a time storm like similar to the one I flew through, but they didn't fly through the heart of it, though. They were able to circumnavigate it, but they used to tell the story many times to me when I was only like 17 years old. And I was working for them, and they experienced something out there. They didn't have a name for it back then, but they said there was something strange going on out there that they had witnessed.
Well, I think that makes sense. It's just my guess, obviously, that it was really an almost instant that you went that distance, and then the remaining 3 minutes was traveling out of it. Because when we think about warp drive, traveling from star system to star system, what's theorized is how fast we can get there, which means on the scale of 100 miles or 50 miles or 20 miles, that would be almost instant. Yeah,
that is seemingly instant. In fact, you see Star Trek, you see the stars are like streamers because of the speed.
Right. Yeah. So you would agree with Professor Paris. It took me quite a few months to come around to his thinking, but he's done a lot of research on it. He has a website that's called The Science of Bruce Gernon's Flight. It's like 20 pages of super details and mathematics and everything you think of related to it. And he claims, it was an instant thing that happened to me. Less than a second, he thinks I traveled almost 90 miles.
Yeah, and he was an Army meteorologist as well, so that's where he got his meteorological training. But what is interesting about David Perry's is his pursuit of science began with a UFO encounter when he was, 16, Bruce, was he? 16, 17?
Yeah, he was quite young, yeah.
Yeah, right. And he was with a group of kids, and they were going swimming together. They're gathered together, waiting for the ride, I guess. And that's when this UFO craft came over the hill in the distance and moving very slowly. So they had a good look at it, moving across the sky only about 30 miles an hour. And as Bruce can tell you, airplanes can't fly 30 miles an hour, and so they would just fall out of the sky. And so David Perry was very fascinated by this. It came right overhead, and then it just shot instantly at its extraordinary speed and vanished in the distance. And so while most people would wonder who is flying that craft, that UFO, who is inside, David Paris wondered how was it flying? What was the type of engine propulsion, that it had? Yeah. What type of propulsion did it have? What system? And so at that point, he changed his whole career plan and decided to try to learn as much as possible in interdisciplinary fields of science. That's why he got into astronomy, meteorology, physics, and it was all with an interest of figuring out how the propulsion system of a UFO, of the craft, and could he create a warp drive, and that's been his life's goal.
Well, it makes me wonder, what is the connection between your visual experience of describing it as this sort of electric fog and the actual functioning of a time warp? What does a fog have to do with a time warp? Is it just that there's cloud formation in the right place?
David Perry's concept about it is that it's ionized air that creates this fog, that the ionized air around the craft creates this fog, and it goes with it. That's how he explains it. So
it's almost like creating static electricity, but you're creating the moisture, and it's sticking to this ionization that's happening around this warp bubble.
Yeah, and a lot of pilots, as Bruce can tell you, get very disoriented and end up going into a death spiral because they can't get out of it. And Bruce and I have talked to and researched a number of stories of other people, and there's who is the woman in the Keys who had the experience with Bermuda, with the electronic fog, Bruce?
Right, yeah.
I can't
remember her name either.
Yeah, right.
She has a well-known flight. She was in the ALPA magazine. They wrote about it. They normally don't write about things like this. That's one of the things that I need to get the word out to pilots, that the electronic fog is real. And this is really my whole goal of my future. I'm determined, and I'm never going to give up spreading the word that electronic fog is real, and it's super important that it be identified by mainstream science, because we're going to save lives, first of all, by teaching pilots what to do if they get captured by this fog. It's like the Malaysian flight, or Flight 19.
Yeah. And Alan, it doesn't always necessarily involve time travel or teleportation either. Bruce has 5 different levels of electronic fog that he describes in the book. Some of it is just attached. Maybe you can describe it better, the different levels of electronic fog.
Yeah, well, level 1, I believe there are thousands of pilots that have been in level 1. And what happens is you're flying along, especially in the Bahamas, and visibility is clear, almost unlimited. And then all of a sudden, it goes down to just a few miles. It's like, what? How did that happen? And they think they're flying through an area of haze, but it's not. It's the electronic fog that has attached to them. But it's so weak it doesn't affect any instruments or anything.
So the electronic fog attaches to them, but there's no actual time warp.
No.
Okay, so
not at a low level. I experienced in 1996 level 2, I believe it was, and that's where you mentioned that, Robbie, where there was a hole below, but it was only below the airplane. I was clear above me, and this strange hole that Rob was telling you about traveled with me, and I thought it was some sort of meteorological phenomenon that I didn't understand how the hole could be traveling with me, because I didn't realize that I was attached to electronic fog. And that's when the radar controllers said there was no fog anywhere in Florida. So that actually helped to confirm that it was attached to me too. So when I went through this tunnel, I would call it number 4, or the highest category would be number 5. It'd be borderline number 5 when I flew through this tunnel. And this is where I believe the electronic fog is created, inside these tunnels. And I've seen dozens of these tunnels. And what happens when the tunnel collapses, it emits a sphere of the electronic fog. And then depending on the wind currents, it can go up. It could go up to as high as 90,000 feet, probably. We're getting ready to set a new glider record using currents going up to 90,000 feet. Or it can stay at the same altitude. Or if there's down currents, it can go down to Earth. And Rob will tell you some great stories about some people that have had experience with this fog on the Earth. And like normal fogs, it can last for many hours, maybe even a half a day or more.
Well, the fog, it's small, the area that it covers. So I'm wondering if a satellite is looking down at the exact moment that you're passing through this time warp, what does it look like to the satellite picture?
I don't think it's visible for a satellite. The mother storms are visible, and I've got them even on a video from a guy named Don Piltz that I worked with that captured it on video. And I was on Japanese television with him once, showing these time storms in the middle of the United States they were forming. So the category 5 would be the most intense of all electronic fog. And so if the airplane was in that, major problems would be happening and possibly disintegration.
So the difference between the 4 and the 5 would just be the intensity of the experience.
There would be time travel involved in category 4. Either forward or backward. Forward or backward. You can go either way.
And 5, there would not be time travel?
Well, that's unexplainable. That's why I said disintegration, that the vessel or airplane is gone.
So it
could be time travel or teleportation.
Right.
Your displacement right out into space or whatever, into the cosmos.
Sure.
More. So it would be a more intense experience. Ellen, let me tell you a story about Don Piltz, because that Bruce just mentioned. It's kind of interesting because he was a sheriff, a county sheriff in Indiana, and he had just retired. And he'd read our first book, The Fog, that was published in 2005. And after he finished it, he contacted Bruce because he wanted to tell him about the experience that he had. He had a very unusual experience where he was driving in a car and he encountered something that sounds very much like electronic fog. He was taking his father home from a doctor's office. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when he noticed this strange looking cloud, and it seemed to rise right from the ground like a vertical wall. And as they drove towards this wall, a tunnel opened up in it, and suddenly this huge silvery sphere, like 30 feet across, shot down the road and right past them and right through into that tunnel and disappeared. And so he pulls over and stops. He's feeling nauseous and disoriented. Both he and his father are. They watch that sphere move towards the wall and right through that tunnel. And so that was, then suddenly they were startled to find that it was 5 o'clock. And they had been, just coming home from the doctor's office at 1 o'clock. So there was a missing time element in their story. And he believes what happened, that sphere he believes it was a UFO, and they had some kind of encounter that was just wiped from his mind. So there is a UFO element involved in all of this too. And one of the theories about the Bermuda Triangle is that it's an interdimensional passageway, and that could relate, to the time travel, the teleportation, the electronic fog, all of it, and possibly that lenticular cloud that Bruce went over. There could have been a UFO inside that cloud, and that produced the whole experience. Maybe it was just heading out to wherever. So that's different levels of this story are involved, and it's theory, it's speculation, but it's all fascinating.
Well, I think that's interesting because let's just say that this was a natural occurrence. It seems a bit odd, right, that it would be so stable, be in the same place. It hardly, on the rare occasion it does, but it hardly causes any damage. It almost sounds like it's something that's a port that is engineered. Like it's been put there rather than just a natural happening, because it's like, okay, if this is a natural happening, why aren't people getting sucked up randomly throughout the earth? Or, when we go out into space. So it does make one think that it could be fabricated. And I guess that would have to be by an alien species or something.
Possibly. And a lot of these have happened in the Bermuda Triangle, not too far from Andros Island. And on Andros Island is a secret Navy base called AUTEC, which it's secret in the terms of what they do. It's actually known that it exists there. There are civilian workers as well as military workers there, but the question is, what do they do and what do they know? Because it's much of what they do is secret. They, in their website information, talks about their underwater sonar work in detecting submarines, but there's a lot of UFO sightings near Andros, and we've talked to civilian workers who have had experiences out there, unusual experiences. Bruce had one. I don't know if that guy was that guy you met a civilian, or was he in the military? Do you know, Bruce? The guy at Flanagan's?
Yeah, I believe he was a civilian.
Why don't you tell that story? That's fascinating.
Well, actually, let's tell that story when we get back. We're at our second break. You're listening to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, on the Inception Radio Network, and we are talking about the many or several theories about what the Bermuda Triangle could be, what that time warp might be. In fact, was it made by another species? Who knows? Hang in there. We will be right back. Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your host on the Inception Radio Network, and taking us out of the break was Tuesday Afternoon by the Moody Blues. My guests tonight are Bruce Gernon and Rob MacGregor, authors of Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. Bruce and Rob, what website should people visit to find out more and to get the book as well?
My website is www.robmacgregor.buzz, And I also have a blog that's called blog.synchrosecrets.com. And the best place to get the book really is just going online and to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, and also going to Barnes and Noble. The book is out and in the bookstores.
Oh, it's in brick and mortar.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. And what about yourself, Bruce?
Electronicfog.com has got information about my experiences.
Okay, and you can also find out more about the fog, your previous book, I guess, at those websites as well, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So, Bruce, we were in the middle of little storytelling until we interrupted you on the break. Do you want to continue on where you left off?
Okay, well, Rob was talking about the Autek Navy base, which is for submarines on Andros Island, which is very unusual for a place to be of that location and be top secret, because there's the tongue of the ocean there, which is the deepest area in all of the Bahamas. It goes down to 6,000 feet, and it's about 100 miles long and 30 miles wide.
Mm-hmm.
And all around Andros Island is where there are many people that have had experiences similar to what I've had. I would say Andros Island is actually the center of the Bermuda Triangle, and that's where that Navy base is. But Rob wanted me to tell you this story about when I was at a local bar waiting for dinner, and a guy across the bar told the barmaid that he wanted to talk to me. He recognized me from being on all these TV shows, so I went over and sat by him, and he had a nice shirt on, and it had the words Autek on it. And he said, yeah, he worked for Autek. He was like one of their scientific executives, and he was getting ready to retire. And I guess he had a few drinks, so he said he was going to tell me 2 stories. But then he changed his mind. He said, well, I'm only going to tell you the one story because I can't tell you the other one. So he told me the one story where he was in a submarine, and he was on the southern end at the tongue of the ocean, several thousand feet down, doing experiments with torpedoes. And all of a sudden, all their instruments went haywire. Compass is spinning. They can't identify their exact location. And so everybody's freaking out, including the captain.
Mm-hmm.
But then about 2 minutes later, everything comes back online. So then they check their instruments again. Similar, reminds me of what we did, we checked our instruments before we entered the tunnel, and then after we escaped the electronic fog and found that we had somehow traveled 100 miles in 3 minutes. Well, they did the same thing. They traveled to the northern end of the tongue of the ocean in a submarine in only 3 minutes.
Huh.
So that was a pretty incredible story he told me.
Well, I see. That's what I find the most frustrating, I think, might be the best word, because on the one hand, it seems like for the most part these things are stable. On the other hand, it's like we have no way of knowing why they're there, how many are there, and it makes one feel like they're out of control.
Yeah, I think UFOs may have a lot to do with it. USOs, let's say.
Right, USOs.
Situation I just explained.
Yeah, we have another submarine story from another civilian Autek employee. By the way, Autek means Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center. That's what those initials mean.
Okay, thank you for that.
UTEC, yeah. So, okay, this man we'd been in contact with, and he was also in a submarine, and in the tongue of the ocean, which is 6,500 feet deep, and on radar, a few miles out in front of them, was what appeared to be an island about a mile across. And they're looking at this thing, and it's impossible. There's no islands out there. And so they're moving closer to it and wondering what it was. And they're getting closer and closer. They get about a mile away, and suddenly it's gone. It's just like it vanishes, as if it sunk, as if it was a craft, like a mothership that went down and out of their radar. So they reported it to the captain. He put it in his log. They checked the radar the next day. Nothing wrong with the radar. So that was a mysterious experience. And then there's one more, a man named David Malcolm, who we were in contact with, also a civilian AUTEC employee, who was on a boat and recovering torpedoes, spent torpedoes that were part of a project he was involved in. And so he was standing on the platform at the back of the boat, and they were approaching a torpedo, and he looks down and he sees something underneath the surface that looks to him as if it's like an huge underwater cable, and it looks to where there is no cable at all. There would be no cable, and the only thing that he could think of, it could be, was submarine, and it wasn't a submarine, and it was rising up right underneath, and then it stopped, and then it suddenly sank back down out of sight. And so what he thinks it might have been is like a UFO coming up vertically. So he's just seeing the rim, the outer rim. It came up and detected the craft and then sank back down out of sight. And so he didn't tell anybody about it on the boat because they were all sworn to secrecy. And that was something that was really drilled in people who worked at AUTEC, including the civilians, that you can go to prison if you report any information or tell people who don't have the need to know anything about your work or what you see. Mm-hmm. So, but he has been away from that for years, and interested in what's going on with the Bermuda Triangle. And we actually met him on Andros when Bruce and I were there for UFO Hunters. It was an old cable History Channel show that was lasted for several years, and we were guests on the show, and got a chance to meet some of the other people. They were doing one on the Bermuda Triangle and on AUTEC, and we attempted to get into AUTEC actually, but that didn't work very well. We went with the crew and decided to see if we could approach the gate and maybe get in and meet the commander or talk to or get a tour, because the producers had contacted the public relations people over and over, and they never said no, they just never responded at all. So we decided just to approach them. And we stopped probably about 100 yards away from the gate, and immediately two police cars come up, and instead of approaching the gate, they come in sideways, nose to nose, blocking the gate. And then a black helicopter lifts up from behind the gate, hovers over us, and so the guys who are the main people on the show said, I think we better not go any further. I think it doesn't seem like we're very welcome here.
Well, did you have all the cameras out at that point?
Yeah, the cameras were out.
Yeah, I'm sure that attracted a lot of attention.
Right, yeah. They didn't want to have anything to do with us.
Yeah, it's top secret.
Yeah,
top secret stuff going on in there. And I've been on the base many times because I used to have a friend that was a mathematician, scientist that worked for him. And he used to get me on the base back in the 70s. And it wasn't unusual on the base, but then there were certain areas that were totally off limits only to the VIPs that they speculate there's a UFO in one of them.
And when no one was looking, you didn't slip off into a room somewhere?
No.
All right. Well,
yeah, there's a place called the Dome on there that was off limits. Only the most top people were allowed into the Dome. I heard from one of the civilian employees. So who knows what's in the Dome?
Yeah, and a strange thing happened when Rob and I and our wives flew right over the Navy base there. All our navigational instruments on the GPS. We had a highly technical Garmin 1000. It's called. It's like the modern type of navigation instead of the old needles and round dials. It's two TV screens that show everything, and we had the GPS working, and it showed all the islands of the Bahamas where we were going to navigate. And then when we flew over the base, all the islands disappeared, and so we had to navigate all the way back to Palm Beach International without seeing anything on the chart, on the electronic chart. And,
well,
that was unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked one of the civilian employees about that. We weren't really supposed to fly over the secret Navy base, and he said when we did, we were a target of opportunity, and we probably got hit by an electronic, an E-bomb. He called it. An electronic bomb.
You know what, Rob? I think we were too low because I've flown over it many times, but usually I'm at least 500 or 1,000 feet high. We were only a couple hundred feet high when we were doing that. I think they didn't like that.
Yeah.
Well, assuming that this is these warp tunnels are alien constructed, do you have any theory as to who they are? And maybe even why they're here and doing this?
Yeah, I do. That cloud that I flew over, if we're going to assume this has anything to do with aliens, the lenticular cloud that I first spotted, I've read articles by ufologists that the motherships are able to create a cloud around them, and the motherships are big. They're like this, almost the size of the cloud I saw, like a mile long and half mile wide and 500 feet thick or 1,000 feet. And according to, we didn't talk about him. We have a whole chapter on Joe McMonagle, a famous psychic in our book. And he explains about a mothership. And I've seen pictures of them from way back in the 60s. I can remember reading a book by a South American scientist, and he had actual photos that he used a telescope to catch these photos of these huge motherships, and they were like shaped like a cigar shape. That's where they got that name from, cigars. But also the reason it's like a cigar, the skin on this ship, which was almost a mile long, is not perfectly smooth like a rocket ship is. It had like dimples, strange dimples, almost like a sea cucumber type of amoeba thing. And then he had close-ups of square openings in this mothership with saucer-shaped flying saucers flying in and out of the square tunnels. And those ships were probably 50, 60 feet in diameter or something.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that Joe brought up, and I go along with it, is this mothership is a living organism. It's part of a natural part of the universe somehow that is able to, almost like a bird, it's able to fly all around from
Interdimensional.
like an albatross can fly from country to country, continent to continent. Well, these amoebas are motherships that are living organisms, can fly from star to star. And what has happened is the aliens have learned how to work with these strange creatures and use them. It's just like we learned how to ride horses a long time ago and use them. So
wow, that's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce also had a UFO, very interesting UFO experience that took place 1 month after his experience through that tunnel in December of 1971. So this had been sometime in January of 1972, Bruce. Tell that story. That's a good one.
My first experience was December of 1970, and then it was January of 1971 when I was flying on a perfect night at 9 o'clock at night, and it was me and a girlfriend, and we just were going for a pleasure cruise because it was such a beautiful night in January, and so we, oddly enough, I flew up to the 10,000 feet level, the same level that I had flown through that tunnel. And I flew right over Miami Beach, and in the city of Miami first, and then I headed over Miami Beach, out heading to the east. And I was on like the same course, aiming toward Bimini, similar to the course that I took when I flew through that tunnel. Mm-hmm. And so we got about 5 miles offshore, and there was no moon that night. It was like we could see the stars, but the water below us was like a black abyss. And then we look out to the east, and we see this strange light. And it reminds me of Columbus's report of the first sighting when he was spotted the New World. It was like a candlelight, but it was kind of bobbing up and down and sideways and going back and forth. And we both noticed it and couldn't figure out what it was. And it was far away, maybe as far out as Bimini or so. And then all of a sudden, it shot right at us at an incredible speed, and it was on the same flight path that I had taken to escape that storm. And it hit it right for us. And within seconds, it was right in front of us. And I thought we were going to die because it looked like it was massive and metallic. It didn't look like a fog or anything like that. This was glowing orange, saucer-shaped vehicle with a dome on the top of it, maybe, and it was big, over 200 feet in diameter, 50, 60 feet thick. And I thought that was the end, so I turned off as sharp as I could to the left. And while I was turning, I looked back, thinking that was the end, and it disappeared. And so that was the end of that.
See, I think that's what's frustrating is people have these reports, and it is so distinguishable from typical natural phenomena or airplanes and aircraft that it gets frustrating when people try to explain something like that away as something mundane.
Right.
And it's just so frustrating because so many people have had similar experiences. And
right.
How do you deal with that? Do you get criticism as you tell your stories and share openly about your experiences?
Yeah, well, I've been doing it for 47 years, so it's like I have a quest that will never end until I'm gone, and it seems to be getting wider, wider all the time. And do you know Jean Quasar?
Do I know?
He wrote, yeah, he's a writer.
No, I'm not familiar.
He wrote a book that came out almost the same time as our first book, The Fog. It was pretty successful, about the Bermuda Triangle. So now he's got a new book called Bermuda Triangle 2. It just came out at the same time as our book.
Oh no!
And I was like shocked, really, to see that he's actually got some photos in it that I gave him, and I mean, I play a major role in the entire book, and he makes comments like, here's one here: first and foremost of all theories for today is that of electronic fog. So it's like, in his opinion, electronic fog is what's going on here. That's what creates the whole mystery of this Bermuda Triangle. That's why all these disappearances happen. But he also talks a lot about aliens, and he shows a strange pattern of disappearing ships and boats and people, mostly all around Florida and Andros.
Well, I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially now, is, I think, more easily backed by science anyway. I mean, even just something as simple as creating fog, it's really not that difficult if you're just a little bit more advanced than us, I wouldn't think, because we can create fog in a laboratory. We can create clouds using lasers. So this is not very far-fetched as far as I'm concerned. I think the hardest thing is to wonder where these other beings are coming from. I mean, is it going to be, instead of landing on the White House, is it going to be something like from the abyss where it's rising from the sea? Is that how we're going to make contact, do you think?
Yeah, well, that's like in Quasar's book, he sort of indicates that. He doesn't come out and say it, but it appears that there's some sort of underwater base going on here, where Ivan Sanderson was the first one to write a book about it, really. USOs apparently are, maybe they're in the tongue of the ocean or different areas, different deep water trenches where they seem to be coming and going. And maybe I got caught up in the ones, like I was telling you about the mothership. It may have been, I would think it was departing when I just happened to fly over it. And I got caught up in this, you could call it like a wake turbulence, similar to a small airplane flying behind a jumbo jet. They can get in a lot of trouble. So it's like I got in a lot of trouble getting caught in the wake turbulence from the mothership. But this is such a phenomenon, this turbulence. It's a natural type of phenomenon that they know how to manipulate and create it with the power of electronic fog is what's going on here, because time is affected by this.
Again, I just find that so strange, how you could see and feel time, and I hate to go all the way back, but yeah. Did you, when you said you felt it, what was the sensation like?
Well, it was like I was telling you with the zero gravity and the hydroplaning. That was the only physical real sensation.
Okay.
That I felt.
But what about your body? Did you feel like a tingling or anything like that?
No. I have some recent thoughts about hurricanes, though. I've just been thinking lately that hurricanes also have some effect on time. And because I used to live down in the Keys and on an island called Lower Matacumbe that was only like 4 to 5 feet high, and it completely submerged when that famous hurricane in 1935 came. And I remember reading these books about the history of Isla Morada, it's called, and how it got wiped out. And they had some photos, and they were aerial photos, and it showed before and after. And right near where I lived, there was a series of like a half dozen small houses that Henry Flagler had built for the executives of the railroad. And there was also houseboats with many dozens of rooms for all the workers. But somehow, after this hurricane passed, the homes that were in a line were transported I'm not sure how far, but it was not that far, but it was like maybe a quarter mile. They were all in perfect condition. Everything got wiped out, but these 6 homes were transported and everything inside was in perfect condition.
So bizarre.
So it has something to do with time.
Sure.
And so we have a chapter that Rob knows a great deal about because he researched it. And it also has to do with a hurricane and with time. It's an incredible story.
Well, it makes me think about, and I love this feeling. I love this feeling, particularly in the summertime, when a storm is coming and it is electrifying. It's like there's something in the air, and I can feel it in my bones and my skin, and I really do like that feeling. It's energizing, and not that that's what you felt when you had your experience, and you had so many other things on your mind.
Right.
But anyway, that's what made me think of. We are going to take our last break here. I'm speaking with the authors of Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, True Encounters with Electronic Fog, Missing Aircraft, and Time Warps. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on the Inception Radio Network. And hang in there, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Paranormal Now. Our guests tonight, Bruce Gernon and Rob MacGregor, have fascinating topic that they've been sharing with us, and if you're just tuning in this Saturday night, I implore you to listen, because they have so much to share that I think is valid enough based on science. And not only that, but their stories are corroborated by others who've had so many similar experiences. So there really is something going on here in the Bermuda Triangle, and I think they are on their path of sleuthing to get the answer. They have the support of some scientists, which is good, and I think in time we might actually solve this thing. But quickly taking us out of the break was Spy Break by Propeller Heads, and anybody who loves The Matrix knows that song. And this topic is definitely Matrix-like, that is for sure. So Bruce, tell us more about the hurricane and this time travel.
Right. Well, I've gotten emails from a lot of people from all over the world, really. And this one guy from up New England area wrote me and told me a story about an experience that he had in Bermuda. And it relates to a hurricane. And when he first sent it to me, it was like, well, how? He said he read my book, my first book, The Fog, and he said, I can relate to that. And he had this experience with a hurricane. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, how can you relate a hurricane to what I experienced? And I didn't think there could possibly be any relation, but just recently I'm starting to realize there may be a relation. And so I gave the information to Rob, and so he started doing some research. And he worked for quite a bit, couple of months on this project, and came up with a whole bunch more information about this incredible story. And here to tell you all about it. Rob?
Yeah. Okay. This goes back to 1964. John Murphy was in the Coast Guard, and he was on a U.S. Coast Guard cutter that docked near St. George port in Bermuda. And it was a Thanksgiving Day. So he and his buddies had a Thanksgiving dinner, and then they decided to go ashore and go to a bar and have a couple drinks. So it was him and three of his friends. And they get there, and very coincidentally, they come across 4 student nurses in the U.S. Navy Nurse Corps who have flown in and are spending the weekend on Bermuda. And so John was immediately attracted to one of the women, and she felt very comfortable with him, so they separated from the others and walked down to the beach, and they sat on a wall by the beach and watched the sunset. And then they decided they would take a walk, and they left the wall and found this little trail, and they were walking along the trail just at dusk, and they were coming to a hill, and John says, I know it's on the other side of that hill. And he says, there's a small village there, a British village. And she joined right in with him. She said, yeah, there's a church, and it's got a church, and there's a steeple, and there's and he says, yeah, there's a clock on it. And she says, yeah, and the clock is stopped at 12:30. And they kind of laugh because they're just it's their imagination. They're just making this stuff up. So they climb up the trail, up the hill, up to the top of the hill, and they look down, and there's this little village. So they walk down to it. And there's a church there. It has a steeple, and there's a clock on the steeple, and it stopped at 12:30. And they're just amazed. And they're walking around. They don't see any people, but there are lights, lanterns inside of the houses, and they can see the flickering lantern light. And they go up to the church, and John made a point of this, that he took a hold of the door, and it squeaked, and he tried to open it, but it was locked. He couldn't open it. So then they walked around, and they came to this cemetery, and John looks at it and explains to Barbara that, you see how it's divided in half? That half is where the blacks are buried, and the other half is where the whites are buried. Now, and then he thought, how do I know this? This is odd. So they just sit down on the stone wall, and or just looking around, talking a bit. And then Barbara had been to the beach earlier with her friends, so she had a blanket with her in her bag. She takes out the blanket and spreads it out, and they're starting to feel a little bit romantic now, and they lay down on the blanket, and especially John is feeling a bit romantic, and he kind of rolls over towards her, and he wants to give her a kiss. He's starting to lean towards her, and then suddenly he passes out. She passes out. Both of them are gone for 2 hours. They wake up 2 hours later, and they're confused by what happened to the time, why they just fell asleep instantly like that together. And they look around. The village is still there. Everything's still there. They're still right by the cemetery. But then they say, well, we better get going. Barbara has to find her friends, and he's got to get back to the ship. So they walk back up the hill and over, and it's kind of awkward because she's leaving the next day, and but he wants to keep in touch with her. So he gets her address, and they exchange addresses, and she goes off, and he doesn't see her. And then so the next day when he gets some shore leave, he comes back in, and he decides he's going to go back to the village and just sit there and write her a letter. And he likes to write poetry, and he wants to write her kind of a love poem. So he goes, walks up, following that same path up, and comes to the hill and looks. There's no village. It's just a field, open field. And he's just blown away. What? Where's the village? So he goes back into town and goes to the bar, and he orders a drink. And then he asks the bartender, is there a little village nearby here? And the bartender looks at him a little oddly, and he said, well, there used to be one. It was called St. Catherine's, but that was destroyed in the hurricane of 1780. And he says, what? And so he starts to leave, and the bartender calls after him, and says, hey, if you want to find out more about this St. Catherine's, there's an old Navy captain here, and he tells him his address, and he says, this man's ancestors used to live in that village, and he's sort of the island historian. He can tell you about it. So he goes there, but finds the house, but the old captain is in England on a trip, and he's going to be gone for several weeks. So John goes back to the ship, and they leave Bermuda. But several months later, he's back in Bermuda, and he goes and finds the captain. And it's a little awkward at first because he tries to tell the captain he wants to know about this St. Catherine's, and the captain's kind of confused, and then when he tells him he's he's in the Coast Guard, and then he feels a little more comfortable talking to him, and he said okay, and he opens up a cupboard and pulls out a couple of paintings, and he says, these are my great grandparents that lived and died in St. Catherine's. And John looks at the photos or the paintings, and the woman looks exactly like Barbara, and he's just blown away.
Whoa.
Because he had this feeling all along that that he had lived in that village, and he and Barbara had talked about it while they were there, that maybe we lived here sometime. It's just more of their fantasies and thinking about having lived there in the past. And here he sees a picture and it looks like her. Mm-hmm. And what happened is that they got caught in that hurricane. It's called the Great Hurricane. It killed like 25,000 people, swept through the islands, and completely destroyed that village. It was never rebuilt. And the old captain's great-great-grandmother, she died there, but a midwife, and she was very pregnant at the time, and a midwife came along and was able to cut out the baby and save the baby. The baby actually survived, and that became his great-great-great-grandfather, I think. And so he was a descendant of the last people who had lived in St. Catherine's. And so now John has this story verified that he was in that village, and he and Barbara had time traveled back to that village and experienced that village. Although it was odd that they never saw a single person at the time. But yet it wasn't just a mirage, because they, like John said, he said he grabbed that door of that church and he heard it squeak and he felt it, and they sat on that wall of the cemetery there. And so fascinating. But he's exchanging letters meanwhile with Barbara, but he doesn't tell her that there's no village, because he doesn't want her to think that he's crazy. He's trying to he wants to continue his exchanging letters with her, and he's writing love letters to her. And then he finally, after this experience with the captain, he decides he's going to tell her now that there's no village there. And he's about to write the letter, and he receives a letter from her, and it's a literal Dear John letter. She says, "Don't write me anymore. I'm getting married," to man that she's been seeing, and she's decided to just cut it off with him. And so he never had the opportunity to tell her about it. So 30 some years go by, and it's like 2006, 2007. And so John starts doing some research on the internet, and he is able to track down the small town where he was sending the letters, and he finds the town newspaper, and he finds her wedding date. So he's able to able to find out what her last name is, and then her married name, and then he tracks her down and locates her in Minnesota and gets her telephone number and actually calls her and leaves a message. And then he waits several hours, and he wonders if he's ever going to hear from her again. And then the telephone rings, and it's her, and he doesn't even know if she's going to remember the experience or remember him, but she does. She remembers him, and he says, "You remember being in that little village?" And she says, "Of course. We sat by the cemetery there." And then he tells her the whole story, that the village doesn't exist.
And what did she say?
Well, so then I got a hold of her because I wanted to verify this whole story myself, and so I started exchanging emails with her as well, and she says that she doesn't remember ever talking about that they had lived there before while she was there, but she says I was 19 years old and I didn't even know what a past life was then. But now I'm into Buddhism, and I'm very willing to accept the fact that John and I might have lived in that village in the 18th century. So that is very unusual story, and that's one of the best stories we have here.
Well, do you think that déjà vu is just a function of the brain, or do you think that is a sort of mental time slip at all?
I'm not sure what déjà vu. It could be, something that relates to like a different reality, like a parallel life, possibly, that you temporarily tune into, possibly a parallel life or an alternate life. Who knows?
Okay.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, I think, and I think the hurricane has something to do with it. I mean, it took them back in time 180 years, and then it also has something to do with reincarnation.
Well, yeah,
incredible stuff.
I mean, I wonder if these time slips, are actually easier to occur because we're not living in necessarily a linear universe of time, but that perhaps we're living multiple timelines at the same time, and therefore if we're just on these sort of different dimensions, you're really just slipping into this dimension and slipping back in. You're not necessarily going back and forth through time exactly.
Yeah, well, it could be that we have parallel lives and past lives. If you there's also the concept that all time exists simultaneously, and maybe just we are in our everyday world, we're thinking in terms of past, present, and future, but with the concept that all time exists simultaneously, maybe you could just, like you said, just blip into another time that you lived, past, future.
I mean, would you relive that experience if you could, going through that time slip or whatever it may have been?
No, if I was faced with that again, I'd turn around as soon as the lenticular cloud started building up. I'd make an immediate 180-degree turn.
Okay, wow. Right, Emma, have you gone back?
Yeah, well, I go back there all the time. I'm not flying like I used to because my depth perception's not so good anymore, so I've sort of grounded myself as far as flying airplanes go. But my daughter and son-in-law have a 60-foot high-speed yacht, and we've been to Bimini 4 times now in the past 6 months. We chartered out, and I've been going to Bimini, and Bimini's always been called a land of legends, and it is a strong part of the Bermuda Triangle. There's been many, many disappearances there, and there's always been legends there also. But one of the legends is called the Healing Hole, and back in the 60s, a well-known guide, Bonefish Willie his name was, and he was also a preacher, and he discovered what he called the Healing Hole. And I talked to him about it shortly after word got out that he had discovered something, and that was way back around 1965. And he really got excited when I mentioned it to him, what had you discovered, And he says, I call it the healing hole. I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, you take people to this hole in the mangroves on the edge of the water, and they swim in it, and it can cure their illnesses. I said, oh, that's hard to believe. But he went on and on. I mean, I could tell he was very passionate about it. And I could tell, well, maybe he really has something there. And that was so long ago. So I was just there. I got back from Bimini yesterday. And the day before, at night on the boat, I slipped and fell. And I got all kinds of bruises on me and sore elbows and knees. And it hurting pretty bad, aching back. And so I hired a local native to take me and my grandson and son-in-law to the healing hole. And he had been there many times. And when I told him that I knew Bonefish Willie, the one who found it, he really got excited because that was like his idol. And Bonefish Willie was the first one to take him to the healing hole. So he took us there. It was really interesting. You had to go through all these really neat channels going through the mangroves at
were you able to take
speed. Did
you take some pictures as you were going through?
Well, it was so bright we couldn't find the camera button on the iPhone. next time. And so I had taken a picture of the healing hole about 30 years ago, and it's in Quasar's book, Bermuda Triangle 2, an aerial photo of it. And it's changed quite a bit. But it was out in the open back then, but now the mangroves have grown over it because they spread pretty rapidly. So this old native Bohemian took us to this strange hole deep in the mangroves, and we had to take a trail to get to it, maybe 100 yards long, going through the mangroves. And so then we find this, what they called the healing hole. And as soon as the Bahama native got there, I could tell something was going on. I mean, his eyes just started rolling back, and it was like he was going to another world. And so he told us what to do, and he said, take your feet and stick them down into the muck. And so the muck was real strange. It had a combination of mangrove leaves in it, I guess, and really strange feeling, but it actually felt good. And then the water felt good, and we were all just, it made us super relaxed, and it was a great experience. And so I'll never forget it. And I'll be going back often to show other people and help them with their ailments. So like I was telling you, I was all beat up from that crash. I fell down some stairs and really hit hard, really hurting. And so that was yesterday. So I just got back from bowling, and I shot a 205.
Hey,
and,
all right.
And I feel like $1,000,000. I have no aches, no pains. They're all gone.
Well, the proof is in the pudding.
They're all gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real. I'm telling you, it's real.
Yeah. So the healing hole, actually, how is it a hole? I mean, it's not real deep water, though, is it? You said you were feeling into the muck with your feet.
He said it used to be deeper, and bubbles used to come out of it. Mm-hmm. And it used to smell stronger, and some people called it a sulfur hole. But there's no telling how deep the muck went. It was just like, it was real thin muck. I mean, probably could have gone down deep.
You think you could find it by yourself now?
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. I'll never forget the location of that. It's locked in my memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what kind of properties it had. I mean, perhaps because of the substance, it was a detoxifying emergence. But what else do you think is the cause of its healing properties?
I have no idea. There's a lot of famous people have gone there, though, and many of them have claimed that it's helped them. Some have had major illnesses and claimed that it cured them. And on the way to the healing hole, there's a monument to Martin Luther King. Apparently, he had visited the healing hole too. And he wrote one of his famous speeches in Bimini.
Well, so do you think that, and I'm shifting the subject back to the original topic, do you think that there is a chance that we can actually grasp the technology of time warping, whether it's actually just using these pre-existing constructs or designing our own means of transport?
Definitely, yeah, we're almost there. I believe
that's what David Perry's is working on in his garage in Nebraska.
Well, we all know that. I mean, some of the best inventions and ideas come out of garages.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And what about you guys? I mean, if you were given the chance, and I know, Bruce, you didn't want to go back to that, but if you were given the chance to go inside a ship created by man, would you be willing to go on a time warp adventure?
Yeah, that all depends. Yeah, maybe Bruce would. I don't know.
Good control of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Rob?
Well, I'm a little bit wary. I mean, there's like some new innovations coming in commercial air flight where they now can have pilotless commercial planes where they don't need pilots anymore, and the airlines can save billions of dollars. And my next door neighbor is a pilot with American Airlines, and I asked him about that today, and he said he knew about it, and it's coming. He said, but I'll tell you, 30 years of flying, I would never get in a pilotless airplane. He said there's too many things that can go wrong.
Right. It seems like there are too many times where a quick-thinking, adaptive human being actually saves the day. So, guys, this is it. We're towards the end of the show. You're listening to Paranormal Now, and we're interviewing Bruce Gernon, or have interviewed Bruce Gernon and Rob MacGregor, the authors of Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, True Encounters with Electronic Frog. Not frogs. With the electronic... Well, that might be fun, too. Electronic fog, missing aircraft, and time warps. And any last-minute words before I let you go, guys?
Keep your eyes on the sky.
All right, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you again for tuning in to Paranormal Now for the Inception Radio Network. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Bob Tarmac, Joe Champion, and MJ Lucas from the Inception Radio Network for making this show possible. And until next time, let the mystery take you. Be well, everyone.
Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.